and we'll be discussing about the whole AI revolution in the enterprise. Uh, I think before we get started, it'll be great to do a quick introductions. So my name is Harish Doddi. I've been an EAR in Storm Ventures and recently founded a generative AI company. Prior to this, I had previously founded a company in the machine learning operations space. And before being an entrepreneur, I have been an early employee in Lyft, Snap, and Twitter, building a lot of scalable systems. Have been interacting in the whole AI in industry for the last 10 years specifically. So let's do a quick introductions from the panelists. Pooja.
Hi, I'm Pooja Shah. I am an investor at Avanta Ventures, which is CVC. So we're a corporate venture capital arm for a company called CSAA Insurance. Have been with the firm for 2.5 years and in the space generally for a little over 8.
Hi, my name is Oana. I'm a partner at SignalFire. It's a 1.8 billion assets under management fund and also the first VC fund built like a tech startup. I'm a former machine learning engineer like many of you with SAP. I come from the industry and currently I invest early stage in developer tools.
That's great, thank you. So my first question to Pooja, in the last 1 year, the whole generative AI, the technology evolution has really disrupted. Talk to us a little bit about have the VC firms have some sort of investment thesis on the whole generative AI space? And if so, how are they looking at the recent generative AI startups?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think firm to firm, it changes a little bit. So there are some firms that, so I guess taking a step back, if you break down the generative AI space, there are a bunch of different categories in there. So you have more of the foundational model companies that are some of the ones that require more investment, so like Mistral, AI, like all of those categories, they're continuing to be out. Those are pretty foundational. You'll have specific types of firms that invest there. And then you have companies that sort of sit a layer above that, that are infrastructure or tools to help build Gen AI models based off of the foundational models. Again, different firms will invest across those categories as well. A lot of the hype that's been going around recently has been like the very topmost layer, which are pure app-based. And so in some cases really interesting, but in a lot of cases tends to be sort of the icing on the cake, a nice way to tie a bow on something. A lot of like early hype cycle, like this year, a lot of those companies were the ones that saw the most noise around. I think as the year has gone by, we've seen firms put out more and more commentary around the fact that like those will come and go. The ones that are really interesting are the ones that start there but go a layer deeper. To actually have some roots that are doing something more to the foundational models, not necessarily going all the way to foundation, but building on them, and have some sort of expertise in the space, some vertical depth or robustness to what's happening there. And so personally, like that's where I tend to focus, that and sort of the infrastructure layer of how do we provide governance, regulation around Gen AI as well as AI models. But
I think, Ona, same question for you. I'm pretty sure your firm has an investment thesis on the whole generative AI. How are you guys viewing the AI or machine learning startups in this area recently?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that our firm has been investing in AI before this hype started because the entire thesis of SignalFire was using data to automate some of the VC workflows and also giving that to founders so they can benefit some of the data that we have. And so our portfolio spans across the stack. We've invested all the way from the infrastructure layer in companies such as Colena.io for machine learning testing, or Spacey, which some of you might have been using, all the way up in the stack, for example, in companies like Even Up, in personal injury law, and so forth. So if you think about our thesis, we can say we span across the stack. However, we believe the best returns for an investment firm like ourselves are more around the middleware layer for the tooling and the application layer. We haven't backed so far foundation model companies because those are more data and compute intensive.
So that's a very good, observation. So do you think that just a follow-up to that, do you think that the lower layers of the stack is more winning by the bigger giants, and the startups can probably thrive in the upper layers of the stack?
I think every firm has their own thesis. We believe that if you need a lot of compute and you need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, you are better backed by a big, one of the big cloud providers, versus a startup where the seed ticket is between 2 million to 6 million maybe. It's harder to compete that way. We do like foundation models fine-tuned to a specific vertical, but just backing another, let's say, OpenAI competitor, it's not something we're personally interested in.
Thank you. So second question, Pooja, how important is the scalability of a AI startup's technology to your investment decision-making process?
I think it's pretty important from two angles. So one is from a pure investment perspective, the ability of a startup to scale both their model into different problems as well as to different customers says a lot about your ability to be cost efficient, get to customers faster, get to that curve of traction faster as well. And from, again, like the corporate hat angle, we do like working with startups that are easy to scale, easy to implement, because those are the ones that corporate enterprises are more likely to want to work with, like our parent company. So scalability is a huge factor whenever we talk to a startup, both in terms of how they're managing their models, how they're building their models, the way that they're like gathering the data and filtering as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to add anything to that?
I think the only thing I have to add is we talked, especially in this time, a lot about scalability for AI or this and that, and in fact, it doesn't matter what the technology is. When an investor is underwriting an investment, they expect this company to return the fund. So the expectation is they will have an exit of at least $500 million or go global. You cannot achieve that if your technology doesn't scale. Now, how do you determine that? I invest personally early stage, so sometimes there is no technology or the product is not there, it's just the team with the idea, or it's not battle tested yet. So these are things you think about them, and especially if, let's say, an AI model is supposed to generalize, is that critical for the company or not? But it's any technology is expected to scale. I don't believe it's something specific to AI. Of course, there are limitations specific to AI, and if you invest in this domain, I expect the person to know about them.
That's great, thank you. So my next question is, obviously this talk is all about enterprise. When you are seeing startups building solutions, generative AI solutions for the larger enterprises, which areas do you think are most effective or most transformative by this whole advent of this new technology?
Okay, I can start. So I think the ones that are most likely to be affected, again, I think there are multiple layers to that question, but the ones that we see being disrupted the most are the ones that today are the lowest hanging fruit. So On one hand, you have the automation of like busy work is maybe the best way of saying it. So things like reading documents, extracting data, data entry. You see a lot of companies in that space, each doing it in a slightly different way. Like still very interesting, and so we continue to look at that
A
area.
lot of manual data entry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's one area, and I think the other area is highly complex isn't the right word, but areas that deal with a lot of volume of data and may not.
Like a large corpus.
Yeah, so like fraud is a great example where today, not today, but before like some of these newer AI technologies, it was a lot harder to analyze and find signals in the data that is a very manual process. Just like a sheer quantity of data is really hard to filter through. And with some of these technologies, you're seeing the ability to actually capture some of the insights that we were missing. So for insurance, which is what my parent company does, there is a ton of data that goes totally unused because it either sits in a PDF somewhere or there's just too much for any one person to look at. So that's where the technology can actually come in, and I think that's like the lowest hanging fruit of where you see the most disruption happening right now.
I guess another example, since you mentioned insurance, I'm seeing a lot of companies getting traction in procurement. So just extracting company data and assembling it into like a proposal offer, or extracting data from emails and inserting it into like an inventory management system. A lot of areas where you have a lot of data and text, same in healthcare, from like doctor's notes and summaries, those are the ones where it's the easiest lift. But so far, they're very modular parts of a workflow that are being helped by AI, and I haven't seen an end-to-end process or a workflow being totally automated with AI yet, but there are many startups working for that.
That sounds like quite a lot of low-hanging fruit. Thank you. Thank you for that. So my next question is a little bit like an antithesis. Which industries do you guys think will not be affected by these whole AI-powered solutions from the startups?
I'll go first again. So I think the ones where you'll see it take longer or it'll be a lot harder are the ones that do require a certain level of expertise. So again, I apologize. I'm going to use an insurance example. But there's multiple types of insurance, right? So you have personal lines like auto and home insurance, which is very algorithmic. So there is a formula. You give me how old your house is, how old your roof is. I put together the multiples and like I spit out a premium. That is really easy to automate. The flip side is you have really complex commercial insurance. So say you own a fleet of airplanes and you're like trying to get insurance for your airplanes. That level of insurance, or say you're like insuring the port cities in South America. All those different types of insurance require a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, domain knowledge, and like years of working in that space. And those are a lot harder to take and put into an algorithm because each company has different things to look at. There's no same characteristics that you can pull out and say, like, look at X, Y, and Z to determine how much that insurance should cost. So those types of examples, like medical, I think maybe radiology, like some parts of it can be automated, but there are other aspects where you need a doctor to look at the x-rays, or you need a doctor to look at the results to tell you what is actually going on.
So wherever there is a higher human touch that is involved, it's harder to do that. Oana?
I believe all industries will be not affected because it has a slightly negative connotation, but all industries will benefit from AI, and especially a lot of those who have many white-collar jobs. And I think that's a good thing. There are more use cases where maybe it's not possible to use AI today. It's the 1% where you're not, you do not afford to be wrong in a 1% of the cases. And there we don't see AI quite yet.
That's really great. Thank you. So my next question is, obviously the founders, when they meet you guys, talk about their startups, and one of the important things for generative AI is the technology complexity that is involved. How do you guys really assess the innovation that is needed, or it could be the defensibility? Is it like just a wrapper on top of something? Talk to us a little bit about some of those things.
Yeah, I think it depends. Some of us are technical, former machine learning engineer. Then what's unique at my firm, at least, is that we actually have a team of data scientists and engineers in-house who build this data product called Beacon, and they themselves use AI on a daily basis and test different tools. So we have also the in-house expertise for that. I think the industry is fast changing, so we have to, all of us are trying to stay up to date however we can, be it machine learning, paper reading groups, or just trying the technology ourselves first. I don't believe that just assessing the AI part is necessary in absence of differentiation and moat, and a lot of that is at the data layer.
I would agree. I think when we look at companies in the space, and part of the reason we don't look at just the pure app layer in Gen AI is we look for the moat. So do you have proprietary data, a proprietary approach to how you're thinking about the problem? Do you have expertise in the space that other folks wouldn't have otherwise? And that's one way we assess at least the differentiation. I think in terms of the innovation, the layer that's beyond that is, do we actually think that you're solving a problem that's worth solving in today's environment? Or will you last long enough to when it's a problem worth solving? And so that's one where we assess, do you have the ability to go and explain, your technology is viable, your technology is a valuable problem. I can tie a dollar amount to what you're trying to solve for me. And is it a visible problem? Is it something that people are actually talking about, care about, would notice or realize? Or at the end of the day, to use the very cliched example, is it a vitamin versus a painkiller? So that is not necessarily a technical aspect of it, but it is another way we look at, is this an innovative problem or solution in the space?
That's really great. So it's all coming down to the moats of the AI startup. That's really great. Thank you. So the next question is all about, when these AI models become more and more mature, there is a whole different problem we'll be running into, and this is all about the AI ethics. I'm pretty sure the audience would like to know, when you invest in these startups, what type of things do you consider, particularly around ethics around AI, because ultimately the decisions that are being made are all driven by the models.
Okay, I can go first. So I think when we think about ethical AI or responsible AI, it's really hard to assess without diving deeper. But I would say that some of our initial reactions in terms of the icky factor, the creepy factor, or this doesn't feel right, is usually a good signal. We, as investors, or at least our firm, does take a pretty close look at how are you handling personally identifiable information. You have the security. Are you handling that? Are you handling the data responsibly? Are you abusing it in any way? Anything that sort of sets off just red flags on how you'd want your own data to be handled is something that we usually walk away from. But that being said, like, as we look at like Europe and the regulations there, we're also pretty cognizant of how the companies that we're investing in are handling their data and how they're managing their models, assessing drift and things like that. Those are a set of questions that we ask as we're going through diligence, because we don't want to be caught off guard, and we don't want our portfolio companies to be caught off guard when and if regulations do like eventually filter over here and they're forced to sort of retroactively comply with them.
Yeah, we also believe it's pretty important. We've invested in a company which actually is building a quality assessment framework for models. Doesn't matter of what data type. They support text, audio, multimodal. The company is named Colina, and what we've seen from this side of the table is that not only the engineers care about the safety, the bias, the quality, but multiple personas in the company, from the product person all the way to the leadership who wants to understand the visibility. So it's pretty important. We see customers pulling this solution. I would say that there is still a long way to not even talking about bias, but talking about safe machine learning aligned with the industry values and standards. There are companies out there like Guardrails, which is open source, and a few others. However, it's still hard to align it to the industry standard and specific company expectation. Right now, most people in AI focus about performance and how helpful it is, and less about how safe and aligned it is to the company or industry guidelines.
That's great, thank you. So definitely a bias, definitely the performance, like everything is connected. Thank you so much for that. So my next question is, when the founders who are building the generative AI startups, or in general any AI startup, how should they really think about positioning themselves to maintain a competitive edge against the bigger tech companies or even the giants that have been in the foundation model space? It seems like they probably need to completely consider what would be a long-term strategy for sustainability for their startup. Maybe comment on that as well.
Yeah, so I'm an investor, right? So a lot of people will pitch an existing company, Salesforce with AI or Zendesk with AI. Zendesk with AI is still Zendesk, and so that's not very attractive. The differentiation, again, there are 3 layers of differentiation. The first layer that most companies in Gen AI today have is just information retrieval, just company data information being retrieved. And that's already generating revenue. For example, if you think of procurement, nobody wants to write those long letters and all of that stuff. However, that might not be sustainable over time. So the second level of that is the domain data. Evenup is a company in our portfolio for personal injury law, where they don't only access a customer's company data, but they have data from a lot of like use cases and cases in the industry. So let's say I break a finger in a basketball game, the AI would be able to tell me based on this domain data how exactly, what's the amount I'm supposed to receive according to industry standard and all of that stuff. And the third, so very few companies actually are at that second level of differentiation, where the model isn't trained just on the one company's data, the model is trained on industry domain data. But even a lower level of true differentiation is use cases or areas where the incumbent doesn't have a strong system of record. So if, let's say, Salesforce, I believe it's a pretty strong system of record when you think about CRM. But if you think about maybe supply chain or injury law, all of these things, like, so we are looking for software that maybe, or an AI startup that is going against either an incumbent with a weak system of record or where there is no system of record yet. And there are very few startups who have all these three things. Most of them have the first layer, which is why you see maybe sometimes a feeding frenzy of VCs over a startup, because those startups do generate revenue, but over time it's not sustainable if you cannot build a system of record, or at least not sustainable with the outsized returns that VCs are expecting to return funds.
I would mostly agree. So I think what Oana said about finding companies that are going after spaces that have the vertical domain knowledge, I think is part of how I think about it. So companies that are specializing in a space that is not mainstream, right? So like Amazon, AWS is going to build like all these tools for their eventual like model that they acquire or build that's in Gen AI, right? And they will sell it to their customers who are using AWS or whatever other services they're on, but those are broad solutions, right? So they're solutions that are focused on breadth rather than depth, and so where we tend to like companies, or at least I tend to like companies, is where there is some depth there, and so it goes into spaces that are underserved today, so like Oana said, don't have a system of record or don't have good tools today, or tools that are specialized to them and to their specific domain knowledge or like the verbiage that they use, and it doesn't quite fit with the solution. So you're seeing like a Frankenstein sort of solution instead in most of these companies. Really hard, like in one way it is really hard to enter those spaces because they're used to Frankensteining a solution together and they already have so much technical debt there. But those are, I think, the more sticky and the more interesting opportunities outside of where we see like the bigger players going, right? So AWS is going to have a solution, Data Robot is going to have a solution, like OpenAI is going to have a solution. All of these companies are going to have solutions. To compete against those, you really have to focus on like, we're starting in a niche that no one else is really focused on, and we have the ability to help them. Either through our own domain knowledge or some data set that you have. So that's how we think about it.
That's really great. Thank you. Thank you so
If
much.
I may add to that, I think we both kind of talked about the application domain because we talked about domain data. I invest in developer tools, so there you don't access maybe like insurance data. It's more about the developer experience. And even there, what I'm noticing is the middleware is getting squeezed between the foundation model. Providers are adding a lot more SDKs and developer tools because they want to price for them. And then from above, you see the application companies we've talked about, they realize for a better performance, they need to go lower in the stack to build their own fine-tuning and everything. So the middleware, if you're a developer tool investor right now, it's quite narrow. I personally am a big believer in open source, so I'm looking for tooling that's more also horizontal, ETL for large language models, or more API-driven, such that an enterprise, like my former employer, SAP, doesn't need super specialized AI researchers or to spend a lot of money in infrastructure or to buy 20 different solutions to build a machine learning platform and spend 2 million just to get the platform. So looking for more of a consolidated approach and make it super easy for the enterprise.
That's really great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just a quick follow-up, because you mentioned about the developer productivity tools. I mean, obviously, open source is very, very hard. Like, what are some lessons learned, like from your portfolio, open source startups? What are some things that founders should be aware of building open source companies?
I think the biggest thing in open source is the monetization. I've never worked with founders who are not able to build a product. The problem is they don't think about monetization early on, and they might want to charge for it later, and users already get for free a lot of the product. So most open source startups I've seen fail on that part. But I think open source startups, aside that, the specific thing about them is most people who build open source startups are technical and engineers. And when people feel uncomfortable or in an unknown situation, such as go to market, they will do what's comfortable for them, which means build more code and just postpone this thing until these like evil VCs come to you and say, this thing has to make money. Like, we cannot just give you more money to build more stuff. So the one thing open source founders could do is focus a lot on the developer experience, the community, and start thinking about monetizing early on. Not saying they should, every company is different, but at least think about, are these features that you plan maybe to have behind the paywall like worth enough for the customer to switch? So it's kind of all startups, a lot of customer validation, a lot more focus on community, and try to think about monetization earlier on than you might think otherwise.
That's great, thank you. So it's all about early monetization and walking in that direction, the go-to-market strategy. Thank you so much. So my next question is for both of you. Like, once you have invested in an AI startup, help us understand the key metrics you are like looking for, tracking, once the startup goes from pre-seed to seed to growth, like different stages. Like, help us understand some of those metrics, what you're looking for. Maybe like even an example.
So I think at the end of the day, what like VCs care about is the scaling, right? And so are you monetizing on your product? Are you getting customers to buy your product? Are you able to increase your average contract value? So sure, like you may start as a tiered model, but can you get to a point where you're getting like enterprise grade contracts? And so from stage to stage, I think that concept of like looking for scalability exists. It's maybe what specific metric we're looking for changes. Like early stage, it's usually, are you getting users? Are you getting people using your platform? This
Could be
depends,
engagement as well, like how sticky is the product?
And then as sort of time progresses, we're looking at churn, like are you seeing people leave your product? Are there other, like, are they going to other solutions? And then the biggest thing that we end up looking at is like, are you able to land larger and larger contracts? Are you able to like land and expand, right? So can you get into a company, find one solution, we're looking to see how high can we get the exit, and that all depends on your revenue, right? Like how many customers do you have? How far did you get your revenue potential? Like to IPO, I mean, today it's really hard, but in like 2 or 3 years as the markets like bounce back, you've got to be at a revenue where like the public markets are willing to invest in you. And so that again speaks to just scaling. So there are other metrics we can talk about, but at the end of the day, the thing that like matters the most is scale.
I don't know if, I mean, I agree. At the same time, I think if there are some entrepreneurs in the room, probably talk with some VC and ask like, what does it take to raise the Series A? Because you mostly raise it on the team and the idea, and maybe somebody told you like 1 million or some rule of thumb. And I don't fully agree with that, because getting 1 million of revenue here or there, it's not going to necessarily move the needle. When I invest, I try to think what should become true for this company to be truly exceptional. And revenue is a laggard indicator. There are other things the company should learn and execute against the core thesis. And so I'm focusing a bit bigger view on what needs to go right for the company to succeed. Once it's past the Series A stage, and Series A is truly when you raise Series A, when you found repeatability, you know to whom you are selling and how they buy the solution, how they use it. And so for some companies, it's not 1 million, it's like maybe 500,000 or less. It's about finding that repeatability such that this new VC gives you money to get more of the same. I don't think that has changed from the previous markets. What has changed is after that, until now in 2021, VCs were about grow at all costs, just like grow. That's the only thing that matters, scale. And the reality is to have a sustainable business, growth persistence and growth efficiency matters. So it's not at all cost. You have to look at your sales efficiency and all those other metrics which show the business is healthy.
So I would agree. When I say scale, it doesn't necessarily mean revenue, but I guess the broader point is like there's got to be some way that you're showing that you're building towards the business that you're selling to the VC, right? And that could be like getting the right customers, getting the right users, and then you're able to monetize later. But what Oana just said about growing sustainably is really important. And so like one thing that we see a lot are companies that, you know, have gotten from like Series A to Series B, have gone from like 1 to 7 million, but have increase their spending just as much, right? And so, like, especially in today's economy, it's something that we sort of, I wouldn't say walk away from, but look at pretty like closely and scrutinize whenever that happens, because you want to be able to grow in a way that you're not spending the money that you're like earning to get there.
Thank you so much. So this is my last question. Obviously, there are so many AI machine learning startups that got funded. Obviously, the dream is always for every company to be an IPO, but how do you guys look at like exit strategies for these AI machine learning startups? Particularly, you know, acquisition is still there, or do you really see IPO as the ultimate thing? Maybe like some thoughts on that for the founders.
I mean, I personally invest a lot of my time in supporting the founders post-signature. And so, as all of you, I have limited time, and I cannot do that with multiple companies per year. It's maybe 2 or 3 companies where I'm all the way there from the beginning. And because of that reason, I cannot afford to invest in a company where maybe, you know, as a former engineer, I think the technology is really cool, but like, will it make money? Who knows, or who cares? I cannot afford to think like that. The way I have to think is, will this company be exiting for at least $500 million? In other words, is this a real market? And when I'm investing with that thought in mind and seeking founders who have that ambition versus maybe people who would be happier having a bootstrapped company, which is nothing wrong with that. It's just unlikely to get to that scale without venture money. And so, yes, that's the ideal. In reality, very few companies get to that. I think once you kind of have the signal that a company won't be on track for that kind of outcome, you have 2 options. Usually people acquire AI companies for their talent, and it's like an acqui-hire. Those are smaller outcomes and not as interesting. However, if you realize that maybe you're not gonna make 100 million of ARR in the next, I don't know, like 5 years, however you can generate a lot of traction on your open source or with your users, there is still a chance for one of these other bigger companies to acquire you for the strategic value for all the eyeballs and like customer top of funnel that you have. And so if you are maybe Series A or close to Series A, whenever you're thinking about what's the exit like, there are also versions where you don't have to necessarily sell right away. But I think the most important thing for any founders in the room is to just not run out of runway. And so in this market, what's happening with regards to M&A, there's so many companies who will never make it to an IPO and are looking for a buyer. And so the M&A process is actually taking longer. So I would encourage the founders in the room or online, if you have 12 months left of runway, start to think about raising or start the process. And if you have 6 months left of runway, that's when you absolutely have to start the M&A process. It's not going to happen overnight, maybe unless you're lucky, but it usually takes at least 6 months.
Yeah, I would say sometimes, like, I've seen it take longer, so I don't think, like, I usually don't think 6 months is enough. Usually, like, if you 6 months is enough if you know who's acquiring you, right? And you've already started those conversations. If you're shopping for an acquisition at that point, like, that's not a good situation to be in. You're not going to end up with an exit that you want. And so whenever we have companies like in our portfolio that are coming to the point where they're at like 12 months of runway, that's where it's like full gear. Like, you should know, are you going to be able to raise? If you're not going to be able to raise because you haven't hit your metrics, you don't have the support from internal investors, whatever it may be, like, start shopping, because that's the only way out.
Almost like make the process from early on.
Yeah, like you need to have an honest conversation. Like, hopefully you have a board that's supportive and is helping you with that process, but it needs to be an honest process, both with you and the board as well as the company to itself, of can you actually get a raise? Are you willing to take the valuation that comes to you if it's a rough economy, if you've had a rough year, and you haven't hit the metrics that you said you would, like, sometimes you do have to take a hit to be able to think about the longer
Awesome.
picture.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pooja. Thank you so much, Oana. These are really great insights. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.